The winter of 1887 had been merciless to the Colorado Territory, burying the mountain valleys under 6 feet of snow and driving even the hardiest settlers to the edge of survival. Samuel Dutch Morrison had weathered 43 winters in these mountains, but none had tested his resolve quite like this one. His remote cabin, perched on the edge of Willow Creek Canyon, had become his fortress against the brutal elements that claimed lives as easily as drawing breath. Dutch was mending a broken harness by the firelight when he heard the sound that would haunt him for the rest of his days. It wasn't the howl of wolves or the crack of freezing timber, but something far more heartbreaking. The weak crying of children lost in the wilderness. He dropped his leather work and grabbed his Winchester, stepping onto his snow-covered porch, where the cold hit him like a physical blow. Through the swirling snow, he saw them, 5 small figures stumbling through the drifts, their dark shapes barely visible against the white landscape. They moved with the desperate determination of the truly lost, supporting each other as they fought through snow that reached their waists. Dutch's weathered heart clenched as he realized these were children, and they were heading straight for his cabin. "Get inside, quick," he shouted, rushing down from his porch to help them. "The cold will kill you out here." The oldest girl, perhaps 14 years old, looked up at him with hollow eyes that held far too much pain for someone her age. "Please, sir," she gasped through chattering teeth. "We need help. We've been walking for 3 days." Dutch scooped up the smallest child, a girl who couldn't have been more than 7, and guided the others toward his cabin. Once inside, the firelight revealed the full extent of their desperate condition. All 5 girls were dangerously thin, their clothes little more than rags, and their faces bore the gaunt look of prolonged starvation. "Sweet Jesus," Dutch muttered, immediately moving to build up the fire. "When did you last eat?" The oldest girl, who seemed to be their leader, pulled something from inside her tattered coat. It was a leather-bound diary, its pages stained with what looked unmistakably like dried blood. She pressed it against her chest, like a precious treasure, her eyes never leaving Dutch's face. "We haven't eaten in 2 days, mister," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But this is more important than food. This diary belonged to Miss Margaret, our teacher at the orphanage. She died trying to protect us, and she made me promise to get this to someone who could help." Dutch knelt beside the girls, his mountain man exterior melting away as he saw the fear and exhaustion etched on their young faces. "On Dutch Morrison," he said gently, "you're safe now, but I need to get some food into you before we talk about anything else." As Dutch prepared a simple stew from his winter supplies, the girls huddled together on his rough wooden floor, like wounded animals seeking comfort. The oldest introduced herself as Mary Catherine O'Brien and pointed to each of her companions in turn. "This is Sarah. She's 12. That's Emma. She's 10. The little one you carried is Lucy. And this is Rebecca. She's 8. The diary never left Mary Catherine's grip, even as Dutch served them bowls of hot stew and watched them eat with the desperate hunger of the truly starved. He noticed how Mary Catherine made sure each of the younger girls ate before taking a bite herself, and how she constantly glanced toward the door as if expecting pursuit. "Mary Catherine," Dutch said carefully, sitting across from them with his own bowl. "Where did you come from?" "The nearest town is 50 miles through mountain passes that are closed until spring." Mary Catherine's grip on the diary tightened. "We came from St. Catherine's Home for Girls in Silver Creek, sir. It was supposed to be a safe place for orphans like us, but it wasn't safe at all. Miss Margaret, she was the only one who cared about us, the only one who tried to protect us from what was really happening there." Dutch felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter wind rattling his windows. What was happening there? Child, Mary. Catherine looked at the bloodstained diary in her hands, then at her companions, who had stopped eating and were listening intently. She made a decision that Dutch could see written across her face. The decision to trust a stranger because she had no other choice. The people who ran the orphanage. "They weren't keeping us to find families for us," she said, her young voice taking on a hardness that no child should possess. "They were selling us. Girls who got too old or asked too many questions, they just disappeared. Miss Margaret found out and tried to stop them, but they killed her for it." Subscribe to our channel for more incredible Western stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Dutch felt his blood turn to ice in his veins. He had heard rumors of such horrors in the territories, whispered stories of corruption and evil that preyed on the most vulnerable. But to have it sitting in his cabin, carried by 5 starving children, made it terrifyingly real. The diary contains everything Miss Margaret discovered, Mary Catherine continued. Names, dates, where the girls were taken. She made me memorize the important parts in case something happened to the book. Before they caught her, she told us to run and find someone who could get this to the territorial authorities. Dutch stared at the bloodstained diary, understanding that his quiet mountain existence was about to be shattered forever. These girls had risked everything to reach him, carrying evidence that could expose a network of evil that reached into the highest levels of territorial government. And now they were his responsibility, 5 young lives that depended on his courage and determination. Outside, the wind howled like the voices of the damned. But inside Dutch Morrison's cabin, a different kind of storm was brewing. The kind that would either bring justice to the innocent or destroy everyone who dared to stand against the darkness. Don't miss what happens next. Subscribe now to follow this epic Western adventure and discover the shocking secrets hidden in Miss Margaret's bloodstained diary. Dutch Morrison had seen evil during his years as a cavalry scout in the Indian Wars, but nothing had prepared him for what he read in Miss Margaret's diary over the next several hours. By the light of oil lamps and the flickering fire, with the 5 girls sleeping fitfully on makeshift beds he'd arranged near the warmth, Dutch absorbed the most disturbing revelations of his life. Miss Margaret Sullivan had been more than just a teacher at St. Catherine's Home for Girls. She had been a trained detective from back east, sent undercover by a group of concerned citizens to investigate reports of missing orphans throughout Colorado Territory. What she discovered was a systematic operation that sold children to the highest bidders, from mining camps that needed cheap labor to brothels in distant cities, where no one would ask questions about their origins. The diary entries, written in Margaret's careful handwriting, detailed a network that reached from the orphanage director, a man named Cornelius Blackthorne, all the way to territorial judges and law enforcement officials. Girls who reached a certain age were evaluated not for adoption, but for their potential value in various illegal markets. The younger ones were sold as servants to remote ranches, where they would never be found. The older, prettier girls faced fates that made Dutch's stomach turn. Mary Catherine stirred from her sleep and noticed Dutch reading by the lamplight. "Is it as bad as Miss Margaret said it was?" she asked quietly, careful not to wake the other girls. Dutch looked up from the diary, his weathered face grim with barely controlled anger. "It's worse, child. According to this, they've been operating for over 5 years. Hundreds of children have disappeared." Mary Catherine sat up, wrapping Dutch's spare blanket more tightly around her thin shoulders. "Miss Margaret said the corruption goes all the way to the territorial capital. She said that's why we couldn't go to the local sheriff or judge, because they were part of it." Dutch nodded grimly, turning to a page that listed names and payments. "Your Miss Margaret was thorough. She has records of bribes paid to Sheriff Danvers in Silver Creek, Judge Morrison in Denver, and at least 6 other officials. She even has correspondence proving that Governor Reynolds knew about the operation and was receiving payments to look the other way." The implications were staggering. If the diary's contents were accurate, the corruption reached the very top of territorial government. Traditional law enforcement was not just unreliable, it was actively working against any attempt to expose the truth. Mary Catherine moved closer to Dutch, her young face showing wisdom far beyond her years. "Miss Margaret said if anything happened to her, we should find someone outside the system, someone who couldn't be bought or threatened. She said mountain men like you were the only ones left, who would fight for what's right without caring about consequences." Dutch studied the girl's face, seeing the desperate hope mixed with fear. She and her companions had walked 50 miles through mountain wilderness in winter, risking death from exposure because they believed he would help them. The weight of that trust settled on his shoulders like a physical burden. "There's something else," Mary Catherine continued, pulling a folded paper from her dress pocket. Miss Margaret gave me this list of places where girls were taken. She said if we could rescue even one of them and bring her back to testify, we might be able to convince honest authorities in other territories to investigate. Dutch examined the list, recognizing several locations. Most were remote mining camps or isolated ranches, places where armed men could easily overpower anyone asking questions. But one location stood out, a way station called Devil's Rest, only 2 days' ride from his cabin. "I know this place," Dutch said, pointing to the entry for Devil's Rest. "It's supposed to be a trading post, but I've always suspected something dark about it. Too many armed men for a simple supply station, and they don't welcome visitors." Mary Catherine's eyes lit up with desperate hope. "Miss Margaret wrote that 3 girls from our orphanage were taken there just last month. Their names are Jennifer Walsh, age 15, Patricia Murphy, age 13, and little Anna Kowalski, who's only 9 years old." Dutch felt the familiar fire building in his chest, the same rage that had driven him through the Indian campaigns and border conflicts. But this was different. This wasn't warfare between men who had chosen to fight. This was pure evil preying on children who had no one to protect them. The storm outside was beginning to subside, and Dutch could see the first hints of dawn through his windows. He made a decision that would either save lives or get them all. "Kill Mary Catherine, I want you to listen carefully," he said, closing the diary and meeting her eyes. "I'm going to Devil's Rest to see if those girls are still there. If they are, I'm bringing them back. But I can't take you and the others with me, it's too dangerous." Mary Catherine shook her head firmly. "We're not staying behind, mister. We've come this far together, and we're not splitting up now. Besides, you'll need someone who knows what the missing girls look like." Dutch wanted to argue, but looking at the determination in Mary Catherine's eyes, he realized she was right. These girls had already proven their courage by surviving impossible odds, and if he was walking into a trap, having witnesses who could escape and tell the story might be the only way to ensure justice. Don't miss the next chapter of this epic Western adventure. Subscribe to our channel to follow this dangerous mission and discover whether Dutch and the girls can expose the truth before the corruption destroys them all. As the sun rose over the Colorado mountains, Dutch Morrison began preparing for the most dangerous mission of his life. He was about to challenge a network of evil that reached the highest levels of government, armed with nothing but his conscience, his guns, and the courage of 5 starving orphan girls who refused to let injustice win. The final confrontation at Devil's Rest would determine not just their survival, but the fate of countless other children trapped in a system designed to exploit their vulnerability. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Colorado wilderness as Dutch Morrison and the 5 girls made their way down the treacherous mountain trail toward Devil's Rest. Dutch had spent the early hours preparing for what he knew would be either a rescue mission or a suicide run. His saddlebags contained extra ammunition, emergency supplies, and most importantly, copies he had made of the most damaging pages from Miss Margaret's diary. Mary Catherine rode behind Dutch on his sturdy mountain horse, while the 4 younger girls shared his pack mule. Despite their ordeal, all 5 had insisted on coming, and Dutch had finally agreed when Mary Catherine pointed out that they were the only ones who could positively identify the missing girls. From their orphanage. As they approached Devil's Rest, Dutch could see why the place had always made him uneasy. The trading post was built like a fortress, with high wooden walls and guard towers that seemed excessive for a simple supply station. Armed men patrolled the perimeter with military precision, and the whole compound had the feel of a prison rather than a business. Dutch called a halt behind a ridge that overlooked the compound. Through his field glasses, he could see activity in the central courtyard. His blood ran cold as he spotted what appeared to be young girls hanging laundry. Under the watchful eyes of armed guards, "There," whispered Mary Catherine, pointing toward the courtyard. "The tall girl with blonde hair, that's Jennifer Walsh. And the smaller dark-haired one near the well, that's Patricia Murphy." Dutch adjusted his field glasses and confirmed what Mary Catherine had seen. The girls moved with the defeated posture of prisoners, their heads down and their movements carefully watched. This was no ordinary trading post. It was exactly what Miss Margaret's diary had described, a way station in a network that trafficked children like merchandise. We need to get closer, Dutch said, formulating a desperate plan. There's a supply wagon heading toward the main gate. If we can create a distraction, we might be able to get some of those girls out during the confusion. Mary Catherine gripped Dutch's arm tightly. What kind of distraction? Dutch smiled grimly, checking his weapons one final time. The kind that makes men forget about guarding prisoners because they're too busy trying to save their own lives. Dutch's plan was audacious in its simplicity. He would approach the main gate openly, posing as a trader with goods to sell. Meanwhile, Mary Catherine and the younger girls would circle around to the back of the compound, where a small stream provided cover almost to the rear wall. When Dutch gave the signal, a series of explosive charges he had prepared would create enough chaos to allow a coordinated escape attempt. The plan began to unfold as Dutch rode boldly up to the main gate, his pack horse loaded with genuine trade goods to maintain his cover. The guards were initially suspicious, but the prospect of profitable trade overcame their caution. Dutch was escorted into the compound, his eyes constantly scanning for escape routes and counting guards inside the main building. Dutch met the man he knew must be the operation's local leader, a scarred veteran named Captain Wade Hutchins. Hutchins had the cold eyes of a man who had committed unspeakable acts without remorse, and Dutch recognized the type from his military days. Morrison, isn't it? Said Hutchins, consulting a ledger on his desk. I've heard of you, they say. You're a man who minds his own business and doesn't ask inconvenient questions. That's right, Dutch replied carefully. I trade goods, not information. Hutchins smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. Good, because we value privacy here at Devil's Rest. Perhaps we can do business on a regular basis. As they negotiated over Dutch's trade goods, he could see through the window into the courtyard where the imprisoned girls continued their forced labor. His anger built with each passing minute, but he forced himself to remain calm. Everything depended on perfect timing. The signal came when Dutch spotted Mary Catherine's white handkerchief waving from behind the compound's rear wall. In one fluid motion, Dutch drew his Colt and put a bullet through Captain Hutchins' heart. Before the man could react, the explosions Dutch had planted around the compound's ammunition storage went off simultaneously, creating the chaos he needed. In the confusion that followed, Dutch fought his way toward the prisoner barracks while Mary Catherine and the younger girls helped the captive children escape through a breach they had created in the rear wall. Gunfire erupted throughout the compound as Dutch's diversionary tactics worked exactly as planned. The rescue turned into a running battle as Dutch and the girls fought their way clear of Devil's Rest with 13 rescued children in tow. Several of the compound's guards were killed in the fighting, but more importantly, Dutch had secured additional evidence of the trafficking network, including ledgers that proved the scope of the operation. The journey back to Dutch's cabin was harrowing, but they made it safely with all the rescued children. More importantly, Dutch now had living witnesses who could testify about their experiences, making the case against the corruption network much stronger. Subscribe now to our channel for more epic Western stories that celebrate the triumph of good over evil. Within a week, Dutch had made contact with federal authorities who operated outside the corrupted territorial system. The evidence from Miss Margaret's diary, combined with testimony from 18 rescued children, triggered the largest investigation in Colorado Territory's history. The trials that followed exposed corruption that reached from local orphanages to the territorial governor's office. Cornelius Blackthorne was sentenced to life in prison, while dozens of other conspirators faced justice for their crimes against children. Most importantly, reforms were implemented to protect orphans throughout the Western Territories. Dutch Morrison never returned to his solitary mountain existence. Instead, he established a refuge on his property where rescued children could recover and eventually find loving homes. Mary Catherine O'Brien became his adopted daughter and eventually a teacher herself, carrying on Miss Margaret's legacy of protecting the innocent. The Bloodstained diary was preserved as evidence of how ordinary people could stand against extraordinary evil when they found the courage to act. Dutch's cabin became a symbol of hope for the forgotten children of the frontier, proving that sometimes the most important battles are fought not by armies, but by individuals willing to risk everything for justice. This Western story reminds us that true heroism often comes from unexpected places, and that the courage to protect the innocent is the highest calling any person can answer.